then that can be very, very difficult to change. I don't have the answers there, but sort of the options to the government in terms of interventions at schools that are failing is very blunt. It's basically sack the board, but I don't think we should assume the board's necessarily the problem.
The board is very rarely the problem. The board actually has very, very little to do in the day-to-day running of the school. The board is responsible for governance, for drawing up the charter, but in terms of the actual management of the school, relatively little. And yes, if a principal is broken, the principal can be almost impossible to fire, as can any teacher, to be perfectly fair. The issue that often exists is the students and the community that produces the students that we're trying to deal with. At my particular school, we run into a lot of kids who are coming into year 9 with reading levels basically of a 7 or 8 year old. And we don't know what to do with kids like that. They are some of them quite literally off the charts that we have for recording literacy levels. They are so low. And a lot of the time, as far as I can tell, a lot of these children have been very, very transient through their childhoods.
Yeah.
We know about the primary school they came to us from, but we don't know about the 6 or 7 they went to before that. And what often happens, you can have interventions if you want, but by the time a child is identified as being in need of an intervention, and then the paperwork started for it, the funding is available for him, the child has then moved on to another school, and then the whole cycle starts all over again. The intervention never meaningfully kicks in.
So, we were talking about larger impulses before. It's far larger than school governance and micro-interventions, isn't it? It's a whole of society problem that we still haven't got to the bottom of.
Well, David, you mentioned school culture, and I think that's a large part of it. It's a school culture is often driven by the community that supplies that school. And that's a lot of the time what's going wrong. I know of schools where the community simply doesn't support the activities of the school, even at the most fundamental level. And so, you can throw any intervention you want at that school.
Wellington woman Sarah Henderson's complaint about not being able to drop off and pick up 2 12-year-old boys from the Empire Cinema in Island Bay and have them watch a movie by themselves. And we have talked about this twice. And the cinema argues safety concerns and says it requires a parent to stay in the foyer at least. So a last word on this topic, maybe. What do you think of this as a solution? Hello, Jim. The Reading Cinema in Porirua took my mobile number when my girls, aged 11 and 8, went to a movie alone. No fuss was made. Pip. Does that seem sensible to you? Does that sound doable?
Better than banning kids from being able to go to the cinema if they're under 14. I'm absolutely certain I went to the cinema with friends before I was 14.
Yeah, we all did. A chat about political slogans before we go, especially with you on David Farrer. Ones that work, ones that don't. A majority of voters disagree with Aussie Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull's view that there has never been a more exciting time to be an Australian. 53% said they disagreed or strongly disagreed. Labor's slogan is putting people first, which is more popular. What do you think putting people first means exactly?
Well, I'd say it goes back to what I was talking about earlier.
It does, actually.
See, Australia's listening to me, which I'm not sure is necessarily a good thing.
Melbourne University analysis finds that of more than 75 election slogans dating back to the 1940s, many are recycled or copied from overseas. The Liberals' jobs and growth was used by George Bush in 2003. And Labor's people first was used by Bill Clinton, David.
Yeah. And you always have something about future or vision. It is important, though. People will associate with your party or a person 2 or 3 words, and people take quite a bit of care about choosing those words, the ones they want. But the person who's the master at the moment, in a very negative way at it, though, is Donald Trump. He showed he was in his own way, political genius, coming up with little slogans for his candidates, little Marco, lying Ted, crooked Hillary, and it just caught on where they became almost universally used, etc. So there is a lot of power in being able to choose those slogans.
Whose was Steady Does It in New Zealand?
Keith Holyoake, was it?
Well done.
Before my time.
1963.
Also
long
before mine.
It's time you heard We're Keeping Our Word. That was national too, wasn't it? There are a whole lot of ones that are used and used and used again. David Farrer, very nice to have you on the panel. Thank you.
Thank you.
Steve McCabe, thank you, and good luck with the traffic going home.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks, everybody. Checkpoint now.
Kia ora everyone, welcome to Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm John Campbell. On behalf of the Checkpoint team, thank you for joining us. Tonight, 36 dead in Turkey, another attack on the country itself, its people, and also the foreigners who visit it. Brexit, the European Parliament hears from Nigel Farage, while the Commission's president asks him, why are you even here? Malcolm Rewa alone was involved in the rape and murder of Susan Burdett, says the country's top police officer. A leading paediatrician talks about the child abuse he sees and how the rate is climbing. Rain in Auckland, which isn't unusual, but as we're about to hear from Katrina, even by Auckland standards, this was heavy. Delays heading north out of Wellington. If you're leaving the CBD now and feel like describing your journey up the Kapiti coast, which is slow work, text us on 2101. And the new Olympic uniforms revealed, all that and much more. But first, Katrina Batten with RNZ News.
Kia ora, good evening. People had to be rescued from cars, roads were closed and houses and schools flooded when a record hourly rainfall swept across Auckland this afternoon. The fire service rescued a woman and her school-aged daughter whose car was stuck in flooding in Pukekohe with water up to the windscreen. The service dealt with dozens of call-outs, including 80 flooded homes after flooding in all the suburbs west of Mangere. There were large waves in Unihunga where some cars were washed away. One motorist says he ended up helping pull vehicles out of the flooding after his got stranded.
So as I was approaching this water, there was a car situated on this left-hand side of the road here, and about halfway over my crossing it managed to float in front of me. And I lost all momentum, and as a result my truck's now dead on the side of the road.
An Auckland motorist caught in this afternoon's flooding. Buildings were flooded at Matipo Primary School in Te Atatu, while creeks overflowed in Swanson and Mount Roskill. Auckland Transport says all major roads are open and they're checking whether any public transport services have been affected. Today's downpour was an Auckland record breaker. A National Institute of Water and Atmospheric Research meteorologist Ben Knoll says the heavy downpour this afternoon is the most rain in 1 hour in June in over 40 years.
We had our wettest June hour in history that beat out the 14th of June, 1975, when there was an hour of 20.7 millimeters. This hour, between 1 and 2 p.m., 25.4 millimeters of rain.
Ben Knoll says as the rain moves east, the east coast of the North Island could be in for flooding and slips. The lawyer for serial rapist Malcolm Rewa says it's outrageous the police commissioner has claimed his client is guilty of murder. Rewa was found guilty of raping Susan Burdett, but 2 High Court juries could not decide if he murdered her, and the Solicitor General stayed proceedings in 1998. Today, the police commissioner, Mike Bush, said he recognises Taina Porter is innocent of the rape and murder. He says he believes Rewa killed Susan Burdett. Rewa's lawyer, Nigel Cook, says that's outrageous.
There's no basis for the police, or Commissioner Bush, to make that statement. And unless there's something I don't know about, or Mr. Rewa doesn't know about, he should shut up and accept the fact that the case against Malcolm Rewa has been stayed.
Malcolm Rewa's lawyer, Nigel Cook. Eyewitnesses say one of the 3 suicide bombers at Istanbul's main international airport randomly opened fire as he walked through the building. Turkish officials say 36 people were killed by the shootings and explosions at Istanbul's Ataturk airport this morning. One tourist says a man was shooting anyone he saw. The ABC's Frank Bonacorso reports.
Turkish officials say 3 gunmen opened fire at the airport before blowing themselves up, one inside the terminal despite being shot by a police officer. The government says foreigners and security officials are likely to be among the dead. Witnesses say there was carnage everywhere.
There's just massive crowd of screaming people. It's just pure panic, people falling over themselves.
Another tended to the wounded.
One guy had holes in his back from shrapnel, or from glass.
There's been no immediate claim of responsibility, but officials say it bears all the hallmarks of an Islamic State group assault.
Frank Bonacorso reporting. Southland's mayor says his council has backed the Haas to Hollyford highway plan, which would go through a World Heritage site so it can be thoroughly tested. The Southland District Council this afternoon unanimously agreed to support the toll road going into the Regional Land Transport Program for government approval. The 130-kilometre road, planned by a private company, would cost up to $250 million and run through the Fiordland National Park. The Southland Mayor, Gary Tong, says today's vote is a significant step.
It's a way forward, that's for sure. We've been told that we're the ones that have been holding this up, which I totally disagree with. However, the council have agreed today that we'll put this back into the hands of Haast-Hollyford Highway, and we'll hopefully talk to them in the near future.
Mr Tong says the road would have many benefits, but has still many obstacles to cross before it's built. In sport, the All Blacks first five, Aaron Cruden will make his Super Rugby comeback for the Chiefs from the bench on Friday after suffering a neck injury during the second test against Wales. Cruden has been named among the replacement for the Chiefs for their match against the table-topping Crusaders in Suva. The former All Blacks first five, Stephen Donald, who led an under-strength Chiefs side to victory over Wales during their tour of New Zealand, will start the game instead. The world tennis number 3, Roger Federer, says Englishman Marcus Willis's start to Wimbledon is great for their sport, but also makes him very wary. Willis, the world number 772, beat an opponent ranked almost 720 places above him in the first round. Willis had not won any more than $500 at a tournament this year, but reaching the second round, where he'll play Federer tonight, earns him $100,000. Federer says he's played plenty of lowly ranked players before, but this will be different.
People will hear about it, people will know about it, so naturally they're going to support him, rightfully so, because I think it's a very cool story myself, and which is going to make the match difficult. He plays well. It's not like he can't play, and otherwise he wouldn't be where he is.
Roger Federer, New Zealand's Marina Irakovic, is also on court tonight playing Jelena Jankovic. The New Zealand golfer Stephen Alker has qualified for the third major of the year, the British Open at Royal Troon in Scotland, by finishing second at a 36-hole qualifying tournament in Britain. That's the news.
Tonight on Night's traditional Māori medicine with Donna Kerridge, how it differs from Western medicine, why she practices it, and what native plants might come in handy next time you're feeling sick. We have a window on the world of Macedonia's anti-corruption squad, doing its job too well for some, and Liat Collins reports in from Israel, which has a new peace deal with Turkey. Not that it's that peaceful in Turkey right now. On Nights from after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Met service weather through to midnight tomorrow for all of the North Island. Rain or showers for most places, with some heavy falls, especially in Bay of Plenty and Hawke's Bay, south of Napier. Isolated thunderstorms with localised downpours are possible in Auckland, Coromandel, Peninsula and Bay of Plenty until this evening. A cold southerly change may bring snow to the Desert Road later tomorrow. Marlborough, occasional rain. Nelson and Buller, cloudy periods. A few showers possible in Nelson until early morning. Westland, fine. Fiordland, showers clearing overnight and becoming fine. Southland, Otago and Canterbury, scattered showers developing about Southland and Otago this evening, spreading to Canterbury tomorrow, but clearing in Southland and Otago. And the Chatham Islands, occasional drizzle, turning to heavy rain later tomorrow with southeast gales and possible thunderstorms. It's 5:08.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina. 36 people dead, and that number does seem certain to rise. 147 people wounded, some of them very seriously. The Turkish Prime Minister says Islamic State is to blame for the attack on Istanbul's Ataturk airport. 3 bombers opened fire near the arrivals area of the very busy international airport, blowing themselves up after police fired at them. In a moment, we'll hear from the Times correspondent in Istanbul. But first, here's Alex Ashton.
Chaos and panic at Turkey's Ataturk airport as 3 suicide bombers opened fire just after 10:30 p.m, killing at least 36 and injuring 150 more. Armed police tried to stop the bombers, shooting at one before he reached a security checkpoint, before the bombers blew themselves up. Traveller Ali Tekin was inside the airport.
A big blast happened. It was very big, and inside of the airport is very bad. The other passengers also said there was a gunfire, but I didn't hear it. One person shot and entered, and there were 2 explosions. I heard the sound. I was inside the domestic terminal. It happened to those who were in the international terminal.
Wounded passengers and airport staff fled the departures area, and the world's 11th biggest airport was evacuated. Flights were suspended. The Turkish Prime Minister said most of those killed were Turkish nationals, although some foreigners were among the dead. Turkey's security forces believed Islamic State militants were responsible.
Yaptığı tespitler terör eyleminin
Findings by our security forces indicate that this terror attack was carried out by Daesh.
işaret etmektedir. Emareler
Even though the findings point to Daesh, the probe is still underway.
Bu konuda çalışmalar halen sürdürülmektedir. Havaalanımız 2:02:20
The airport reopened to air traffic as of 2:22, and air traffic returned to normal.
Hava trafiği normale dönmüştür.
In the United States, the US Secretary of State, John Kerry, said terrorism was becoming a daily occurrence.
We are still collecting information and trying to ascertain what happened and who did it. And I won't comment further on it except to say that this is daily fare. And that's why I say the first challenge we need to face is countering non-state violent actors for a host of reasons.
Speaking at a rally in Ohio, the presumptive Republican presidential nominee, Donald Trump, said it was time to get tough.
Folks, there's something going on that's really, really bad. All right? It's bad. And we better get smart and we better get tough. Or we're not going to have much of a country left, okay? It's bad. Terrible.
The bloodshed at Ataturk Airport bears similarities to a suicide bombing by Islamic State militants at Brussels Airport and a metro station in March, which killed 32 people. For Checkpoint, Alex Ashton.
Lawrence Cameron is a cameraman and photographer based in Latvia. His flight to Turkey had just landed as the bombs went off. He said there was confusion and panic and no sense of where to go or where was safe. He described the scene as a zombie apocalypse, with people simply terrified, bewildered and lost. The passengers from his planes were held in a pre-customs arrival hall and then, when it was thought to be safe, pushed through past the destruction.
They quickly pulled everyone out of this sort of holding area. If you imagine, before you get into a country, you've got the passport checks, and we were all kept behind those barriers. And when they finally opened them up, everyone just poured through, and the police were there, pulling people through the room, and you slowly became apparent that something pretty awful had happened. There's blood stains all over the floor, and all the panels in the roof had been smashed down. And as we came out into the taxi rank, where you'd usually, hail a cab and off you go, there was just maybe 7 or 8 ambulances, hundreds of police, bloody clothes on the floor. Place was just ripped apart, and they just sort of pushed everyone past as quickly as possible into a multi-story car park, and then just on into the night. Sort of make your own way home. Just don't stay around here. Basically, is what we were told.
So having landed, you were kept on the inbound side of customs and immigration, and then once it was clear to send you through, you were just all ushered through at real speed out into the world, were you?
That's right, John. I mean, your natural instinct is to sort of check the arrival board for your baggage and maybe go to pick up a bottle of whiskey or something from duty free, but it was just, like rushing into a kind of mad, it was just, it was pandemonium. And I mean, the worst image I have from it is people clearly who'd been split up from their families or their tour group or their friends, so desperately looking back into the mass of people sort of shouting and saying in a multitude of languages, but obviously, the police are just trying to push everyone through as fast as possible, and there's a language barrier there again. And I remember one chap in a wheelchair who must have been split up from his family, looking very distraught. But interesting scenes. It's just hard to sort of fathom, an airport's meant to be a safe place, and you feel once you've gone through all the security checks, you're in a sort of bubble, but it's sort of broken for a lot of people today, I guess.
Yeah. Boy, this is terrible stuff, isn't it? It is just so cynical and so willfully evil. It's hard to understand at any level.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I spent a few years in Afghanistan, and I've seen a few things during the conflict there, but it really sort of brings home the I don't know. I don't want to get into politics or anything, but a sort of decay in some part of society somewhere that really didn't discriminate against any race or any religion. I don't know the casualty list, but I'm sure it cuts across all sections of society and all cultures.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, given that it's taken place in Turkey, whilst on the face of it, it looks like IS are responsible, there will certainly be Islamic victims, inevitably, in Turkey, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, my taxi driver taking me to the airport was saying, in his broken English, this is not Islam. This is something wrong. I didn't understand every word he said, but I think I got the message of what he's trying to say.
Lawrence Cameron, who was in the airport, if you're watching us this evening, they were Lawrence's photos he took as he passed through the airport that we were using over the top of that interview. Alexander Christie Miller is a correspondent for The Times. He's based in Istanbul for The Times. He finds himself once again covering a terror attack on a place where there are not only Turkish people, but foreigners too. This appears deliberate, not only to attack Turkey itself, but its critically important tourism industry as well.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Istanbul is a huge tourist destination. I mean, its tourism industry has already been hit by 3 suicide attacks this year, or the city has been hit by 3 suicide attacks this year. But it's also, Turkey is a huge travel hub, global travel hub. Istanbul Ataturk Airport is the 10th or 11th busiest in the world, and at any time of day there are a huge number of people going through it. And so this is a very, very sad day for Turkey.
Alexander, there was a US travel advisory and that they increased the warning level around travel through Turkey. That happened earlier this week. Has that been reported on there and commented on there?
It has, yes. I mean, this is something which people have been sharing on social media, particularly. It hasn't been discussed in the formal Turkish media so much because, as has become customary here, a few hours after the attack, there was a publication ban of all news relating to the incident, to the attack. But this is something that's happened before. There was when there was a bomb attack a couple of months ago. It came shortly after a US advisory. And so a lot of people are saying, well, if the Americans are able to warn their citizens, why isn't the Turkish government warning us? So this is definitely something which people are discussing.
Which seems on the face of it a very reasonable thing to discuss. I hadn't realised is there a blanket ban on coverage of events like this after they've happened? Is nothing being reported there now?
Well, I mean, it's in the case of social media and that sort of thing, it is reported, but you see no discussion of the details of the attack or really very little coverage of it at all in the main Turkish television channels.
Alexander Christie Miller, who is the Times correspondent in Istanbul. The death toll 36, the injured in the region of 150. We will update the latest from Istanbul after the news at 6 o'clock. The country's top policeman has recognised Tainapura's innocence and has named the man he believes did it. The Police Commissioner, Mike Bush, says police accept Mr Pura is innocent of murdering and raping Susan Burdett in 1992. He says he believes serial rapist Malcolm Rewa acted alone. This is highly unusual, but then so has been the case itself. Here's our reporter, Edward Gay.
Malcolm Rewa was found guilty of raping Miss Burdett, but 2 High Court juries couldn't decide if he murdered her, and the Solicitor General stayed proceedings. But Mr Bush told the media he believes Rewa is guilty.
So you accept that Malcolm Rewa acted alone in the rape and murder of Susan Burdett?
I believe so. We believe so, yes.
He said police have sought a legal opinion on whether they can reopen the case against Rewa, but have been told Taina Porter's innocence doesn't constitute the necessary exceptional circumstances.
If we could revisit that again, we would, but as you know, there's a stay in terms of that prosecution, and we have no new evidence in order to put that before the court again.
Taina Porter spent 21 years in prison for the rape and murder of Miss Burdett, crimes he never committed. The Privy Council's quashed his convictions, and the government have offered him $2.5 million in compensation following a report by the retired High Court Judge Rodney Hanson QC. The Police Commissioner has now, for the first time, confirmed that Mr Porter is innocent in their eyes.
We accept the report in its entirety. We accept Mr Porter is innocent. There is no investigation against Mr Porter.
That news has been a long time coming for Mr Porter. He found out about it from a petrol station attendant when he was filling up his car this morning. Tim McKinnell was the private investigator who tirelessly fought to clear Mr Porter's name.
It's been a long time coming. I think Mr Bush is to be commended for saying it. It's taken far too long, and I know that Taina and his family will be absolutely thrilled that it's, that statement of innocence from the police has been made, and it means a lot to Taina. It really does.
He said the Porter camp has always maintained his innocence is an exceptional circumstance, and he'd like to see the police's legal opinion that's stopping them from reopening the case against Rewa.
I'd hasten to add that the police, it seems to me, have spared no expense and no resource in trying to gather evidence against Taina Porter over the last 7 years. It's been pretty extensive and pretty exhaustive. What we're keen to find out is exactly what efforts have been gone to properly review the whole case and collect evidence against people other than Taina.
Mr McKinnell didn't want to comment on the statements from Commissioner Bush about Rewa, apart from saying they were powerful. Someone who does is Rewa's lawyer Nigel Cook.
It's an outrageous statement to make, in my view, Mr Gay, because there's no basis for the police or Commissioner Bush to make that statement. And unless there's something I don't know about or Mr Rewa doesn't know about, he should shut up and accept the fact that the case against Malcolm Rewa has been stayed.
Mr Cook wasn't aware of the comments until RNZ phoned him this afternoon, and he called Rewa inside prison before responding.
In my view, it sort of leads to the breakdown of the judicial, or the process of getting matters determined judicially. I mean, it just takes over. You might as well not have juries, just leave it up to the police.
He said he plans to visit Rewa inside prison to talk further about Mr Bush's comments and find out what his client wants to do. For Checkpoint, Edward Gay.
Coming up, heavy rain caused havoc in Auckland today with 2 people trapped in a car in Pukekohe and houses and businesses flooded. And Starship Hospital's Child Protection Team leader tells us his staff need more training about the right way to respond to evidence of child abuse. The rate of child abuse is rising and something needs to be done about it. We would love to hear from you in any way you choose. Text 2101, email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. We're about to move to Auckland's weather and then Wellington's traffic. If you are travelling north up the Kapiti coast and you are in your car and you can talk to us, text 2101. If the traffic south of Paikakariki is particularly bad, we'd love to hear from you. Text 2101. Heavy rain caused absolute havoc in Auckland today with 2 people trapped in a car in Pukekohe. We're going to go straight to Wellington now. Wellington motorists currently heading north on State Highway 1 are being warned to delay their journey or take public transport after a gas leak caused big delays. The gas leak north of Paikakariki has delayed traffic both north and southbound between Plimmerton and Paraparaumu. Richard Hocken is the chair of the Regional Transport's response team and he's on the line now. Richard, sorry I tried to delay you there. You were sitting there patiently waiting. Are you there?
I am here, yes.
Well, it's lovely to have you. How bad is the traffic?
Traffic's quite bad because of the delays at the gas leak site. It's stacked right back to Parramatta Bridge, but there is good news.
And what is don't give us a suspense, what is the good news?
The good news is that the road restriction is about to be lifted. So we expect that within 10 minutes, the road will now be fully operational in both directions at normal road operating speeds. So State Highway 1 will be operating directly through Paikokariki. However, because of the significant backlog, we're still advising that people from Wellington should delay their travel time, suggest that they even have tea in town before heading north at 8 p.m. or thereabouts, so that they don't get caught up behind a queue.
Well, that's a hell of a tale. So Parramatta Bridge is just where you've come off the motorway. You've just gone past Porirua, right? And you are, and that's the bridge there, isn't it, by the little harbour entrance?
You're quite correct, and so it's
that's a long old tale. Yeah, and is that just moving really, really slowly?
It's really slowly. So it has been flowing now for over an hour past the leak site, but only at 30 kilometres an hour. It is now fully open, I've been informed, and so it is just a matter of clearing that delay, which at this time of night won't happen quickly.
No.
The other part of the message is that Pocock Hill Road will remain closed for some time, possibly through to 8 p.m, and people need to remain on the State Highway if they're heading north.
Why is Paikakariki Hill Road closed? Is that because the just merging people back onto State Highway 1 is just too tough?
It will be, yes. So local people will be allowed access, but it won't be a through road. It will actually create more problems for people to try and use that as a shortcut and get back onto the State Highway.
Richard, this is a difficult old trip north, increasingly often now, isn't it? And I don't want to, I don't want to put any pressure on you to get the shovel out. But how's Transmission Gully going? When is that slated for completion?
2020. That they are working on that as we speak. It's been contractors have been on site now for the last 6 to 8 months, and it's significant improvement could be seen if you can go to the right places and see the work being done.
Right, okay. But in the meantime, if you can avoid getting on State Highway 1 and heading north up the Kapiti coast, you should do so for an hour or two yet.
That's correct. Have tea in town, go and see a movie, and then head on home.
Richard Hocken, thanks very much. Richard is Wellington's Regional Transport Response Team Chair. And if you are sitting in that traffic and going nuts, do text us 2101. Heavy rain caused absolute havoc in Auckland. I'm having deja vu saying this. Earlier today, with 2 people trapped in a car in Pukekohe and houses and businesses flooded. Between 1 and 2 o'clock, the city received the most rain in 1 hour in June since records began. And if you know how much it rains in Auckland in June, that's really saying something. In this case, it was 20.7 millimetres in an hour. Our reporter Tom Furley is in Onehunga, which was one of the suburbs that bore the brunt of the downpour.
Hi, John. So the sun is out now, but earlier today it was a very different situation. I'm on Beechcroft Avenue now. So this is where cars got stuck in flooding. It was very severe flooding earlier today. A short distance down the road, there are people now clearing out water from their garages. One driver I spoke to saw a car float past him as he tried to drive along the street. His vehicle's still there now. He had to abandon it after it sort of ground to a halt and the engine stopped working. We also had reports that there was a wave of water here with vehicles being washed away. There is one vehicle, the one that he spoke about, that is currently just sitting in a driveway. There were also warehouses in Onehunga not far from here that were flooded, including a factory on Wallace Street. That was where the fire service had to actually talk to a person who was trapped upstairs. And John, Onehunga wasn't the only place to be affected. There was a mother and a school-aged daughter who had to be rescued by the police and fire service from a partially submerged car in Pukekohe. That was along Subway Road. The water was up to about the car's windscreen, but the fire service says that they weren't in danger, and the police and passers-by helped free them from the car without incident. Basically, every suburb west of Mangere was affected by this deluge. About 80 homes have been flooded. Multiple buildings have been flooded at Matapo Primary School, that's in Te Atatu. Wild creeks overflowed in Swanson and Mount Roskill. Two cars were stuck in Glendine and water levels were about half a metre along Chichester Drive in Rosehill. The Civil Defence says it's in a state of active monitoring, but the situation is quickly easing as water drains away. I mean, just here, the water went down pretty quickly now, and the water has cleared. Auckland Transport, well, they told us that all the roads are now open, but there continues to be delays on major roads, particularly along State Highway 16 westbound. At its height, several roads were closed and diversions were in place. The Transport Agency also told us there was intermittent flooding on parts of the northwestern motorway, and other problem areas were along Rosebank Road and Wirry Station Road.
Tom Furley, who, with a fairly comprehensive assessment of the damage the water caused in Auckland. Rain just torrentially, 20 millimetres in an hour early afternoon. When I came into the studio about half an hour ago, it was sunny again. Quite remarkable climate in this city. Let's have the sting. We don't have a newsreader just at the moment. Katrina Batten, if you are listening, feel free to join us in the studio. Coming up on Checkpoint, EU leaders have met for the first time since the Brexit vote in Brussels. We'll go live to our correspondent who will... Welcome, Katrina. It's lovely to have you here. Who will trigger Article 50 and when? We're also going to look back at the extraordinary scenes in the European Parliament last night. Quite bizarre. So that's coming up. A leaked report backs the idea of shifting Auckland's port from its downtown site, prime real estate at the moment, and a Michigan prosecutor considers whether the words of a pet parrot could be used as evidence in a murder trial. Katrina has arrived like Usain Bolt with the 5:30 headlines.
A record hourly rainfall deluged parts of Auckland this afternoon, stranding people in cars, closing roads and flooding houses and schools in the suburbs west of Mangere. The lawyer for serial rapist Malcolm Rewa is outraged that the police commissioner, Mike Bush, has claimed his client is guilty of the murder of Susan Burdett. Two High Court juries couldn't decide if Rewa murdered Ms Burdett, and the Solicitor General stayed proceedings in 1998. The country's environmental watchdog has criticised the government's landmark environmental report released last year. The report, compiled by the Ministry of the Environment, was the government's first State of the Environment report in 8 years. A working group looking at the future of the ports of Auckland has reached consensus on moving it to one of two options, the Firth of Thames or the Manukau Harbour. But this would be long-term, and in the meantime the economic viability of the current port would be boosted. A Taranaki environmental group is calling for an end to land farming in the province. Land farming is the practice of spreading oil and gas waste onto marginal farmland to allow it to break down and later be resown with pasture. The Prime Minister of Turkey says a suicide bombing that killed dozens of people at Istanbul's international airport appears to have been carried out by the Islamic State group. And nominations open tonight in the contest to replace the British Prime Minister David Cameron, who resigned in the wake of the UK's decision to leave the European Union. The front-runners are the former London Mayor Boris Johnson and the current Home Secretary Theresa May. Those are the headlines. I'll be back at 6, hopefully, with more news, sport and weather.
Thanks very much indeed, Katrina. Let's turn to business now with Giles Beckford, our business editor. Giles, welcome. The Financial Markets Authority, the FMA, is investigating insurance agents who may be trying to profit from needlessly advising consumers to switch policies.
Indeed, it's one of those areas which is ripe for exploitation of consumers by the unscrupulous. In particular, the FMA says it's looking at a practice that's known as churn, as in milk churns. And this is in particular where an advisor might tell you that you should perhaps find yourself a new life insurance policy. You can get perhaps better cover for it, or you can get lower premiums. What you don't know is that, in fact, the insurance agent may well have will be getting a commission on that one. And in fact, some of the other inducements include free overseas trips. So the unscrupulous agents, if they were out there, could exploit consumers without consumers having the foggiest idea. They'll be out of pocket as a result, and the FMA is trying to stamp down on that. It's going to investigate further. A couple of hundred insurance agents with a high turnover, in particular, have come to their attention. They'll be subject of some scrutiny.
Gosh, I look forward to hearing more about that. Giles, a sharp fall in unemployment, but it's not as good as it sounds, is it?
Well, a mere click of the mouse. There are lies, damned lies, and then statistics. And Stats New Zealand has revised the way it's doing the unemployment numbers. It's now decided that if you're just cruising the web, possibly looking at situations vacant, new career opportunities, they won't count you as unemployed, actively seeking work. And therefore, all of a sudden, the number of people seeking work has dropped. The unemployment rate has dropped from 5.7% as we first thought at the end of March to 5.2%. That's actually a 6-7 year low. So it's wonderful what you can do with numbers if you really try. It does raise very quickly an issue, though, that if you can't trust the numbers that the Stats Department give you, then how do you base policy on them?
Yeah, it's a very good question. We should chase this down. Is this the politicisation of the Stats Department? We'll call them and ask them, Giles.
Let's have a quick look at the market. So a good bounce back for the share market today, up 1.3%. Final number 68.04. Beware of the dead cat bounce, as they say in the trade. New Zealand dollar still quite firm, 70.8 US cents, 95.5 Aussie, and 53.1 British pence.
Giles Beckford, our business editor. Thank you very much indeed. I just sideways to Giles. Thanks, Giles. We really appreciate it. 5:35. We turn now to Brexit and the developments of the past 24 hours. British politics remain distracted and divided. David Cameron will not trigger Article 50, meaning the formal proceedings to leave the European Union have not even begun. Europe's politicians appear increasingly frustrated by that, but who in Britain can do it? And who is prepared to? Speaking to media in Brussels, Mr Cameron repeated his personal regret about the Leave vote.
I threw myself in head, heart and soul to keep Britain in the European Union, and I didn't succeed. And in politics, you have to recognise that you fight, and when you win, you carry out your programme, but when you lose, sometimes you have to say, right, I've lost that argument, I've lost that debate, it's right to hand over to someone else who'll take the country forward. Now, of course, I'm sad about that, but frankly, I'm more concerned about Britain getting its relationship right with Europe. That is a far bigger thing than whether I'm Prime Minister for 6 years or 7 years or what have you.
In London, people who agreed with Mr Cameron's regret about Brexit assembled in their thousands to express support for the European Union. Many were young, reflecting the demographic most likely to have voted for Remain, and some carried EU flags and placards expressing a fervent desire to remain. The event had been planned for Trafalgar Square and was widely promoted, but was cancelled at the last moment when organisers feared the turnout would simply be too great. An informal version happened anyway. Londoners were protesting against leaving in Brussels. The European Parliament that Britain will eventually no longer be part of was reacting to the Leave vote.
I would in fact like to start...
There can have been few sessions in the history of this Parliament quite like it. Guy Verhofstadt, former Belgian Prime Minister, told the British people he regretted their decision and didn't want to accept it.
But we have to accept it. Their choice was clear and need to be respected. At least on that, I think the more than 700 members here can agree.
So far, so conciliatory and reasonable. But then, having affirmed Britain's democratic right to make a choice, Guy Verhofstadt continued.
What makes it so hard for me, and I think also for the other group's leader and for everybody here in this House, is the way it succeeded. The absolute negative campaign. The posters of Mr. Farage showing refugees like in Nazi propaganda because he copied it at that moment. I never thought it was possible that somebody in this House should do a thing like that.
In Belgium, invaded by Nazi Germany in May 1940, such words have meaning. And on the same front row as Guy Verhofstadt, 9 places along to the right, a small Union Jack on the desk in front of him, Nigel Farage sat listening. Earlier, the European Commission's president had questioned his presence in the chamber at all.
And to some extent, I'm really surprised that you are here. You were fighting for the exit. the British people voted in favour of the exit. Why are you here?
Good morning. Good morning. Funny, isn't it? Funny, isn't it?
The answer came from Mr Farage himself. After the House chairman had asked MPs to be quiet, he rose to speak like an old boy made good returning to a school he'd been bullied at.
Well, thank you, Mr Schultz. Isn't it funny? You know, when I came here 17 years ago and I said that I wanted to lead a campaign to get Britain to leave the European Union, you all laughed at me. Well, I have to say, you're not laughing now, are you?
It was an extraordinary speech, defiant, inflammatory, bombastic, victorious.
What happened last Thursday was a remarkable result. It was indeed a seismic result, not just for British politics, for European politics, but perhaps even for global politics too, because what the little people did, what the ordinary people did, what the people who have been oppressed over the last few years and seen their living standards go down, they rejected the multinationals, they rejected the merchant banks, they rejected big politics, and they said, actually, we want our country back.
It was part boastful, part entreating. Doors were slammed, then opened again.
But what I would like to see is a grown-up and sensible attitude to how we negotiate a different relationship.
And then slammed shut again, harder.
I know that virtually none of you have ever done a proper job in your lives.
He would insult and bait, then try to negotiate on the run.
So why don't we just be pragmatic, sensible, grown-up, realistic, and let's cut between us a sensible tariff-free deal, and thereafter recognise that the United Kingdom will be your friend.
Nigel Farage finished to a smattering of applause, sustained jeers, and mostly silence. Then he sat down, licked his lips, and grinned. Really was quite an extraordinary performance. We're joined now live by our correspondent in Brussels, Kevin Ozebek. Kevin, it's lovely to have you with us. Thank you so much for joining us. Have you ever seen anything like that in the European Parliament? And we have to remember, this is a place that has Marine Le Pen. UKIP has been there for years. It's nutty sometimes, but anything ever like that?
Well, John, of course, sometimes in that European Parliament there can be tense moments, there can be some pretty nasty exchanging of words, but never anything like this before. That was just a jaw-dropping moment when we saw UKIP leader Nigel Farage get up there, look around the Parliament, address his fellow members of the European Parliament, and heavily insulted them. And then after the insults, like when he said, you probably never created a job before, you're probably not very good at your job, he then asked for tariff-free trade going forward in the Brexit negotiations. So really just a stunning moment there. And looking at some of the reactions from the MEPs there, we saw a shaking of heads and literally jaws were dropping there.
Yeah, people with their heads in their hands. Some great pictures come out on social media overnight. The issue, though, is the European Union now have this recalcitrant, difficult child behaving badly. They want Article 50 to be triggered. It's not being triggered because either people in Britain can't do it or simply don't want to. And so what on earth happens next? What does Europe do?
Well, later today, all of the EU leaders, with one exception, Prime Minister David Cameron is not invited to this, will be meeting to basically put out the groundwork for the future of the EU. They do know that there has to be some major reforms going forward in order to quell rising Euroscepticism all across the continent. Of course, there's far-right parties in Europe, Austria, the Netherlands, and so on, that could potentially down the road want to hold their own referendums to lead the EU. But what's very interesting, John, is that in the days following these UK referendum results, it appears that the EU is not being impacted as greatly as first feared. In fact, European Council President Donald Tusk even said that last night when he was meeting with EU leaders. Really, the severe implications, at least in the short term, at least right now, seem to be happening in the UK. Everybody always thought that the EU needed the UK more than the other way around. And maybe it's turning out that that's not the case.
Kevin, Guy Verhofstadt, who was a former Belgian Prime Minister, and I mean, he's a fairly tough character. He made a very idealistic speech about the potential for the European Union to use this as a form of impetus to reinvent itself, to be better, to address the criticisms and to respond in a way that makes it better. Is that possible at all?
Well, of course it's possible, and now this could be viewed as a unifying moment for the remaining 27. That's at least the hope going forward from EU leaders. They want this as an opportunity to rebrand themselves and maybe to reshape the foundation of the EU. A few months ago, when Prime Minister David Cameron was here in Brussels talking to EU leaders, he negotiated an EU reform package that he took back to the people of the UK and basically said to them, here's some reforms I have for you. This is good enough for us to stay. One of those reforms that he negotiated was having the UK exempt from the EU clause an ever closer union. And based on what we're hearing EU leaders say, it looks like they may be backtracking from that ever closer union as they go forward. There could be a priority going forward to keep and really make stronger national identities and using that in the to make the EU better than coming up and pushing this Europe-wide identity.
Kevin Huzebek, our correspondent, live from Brussels. Thanks so much, Kevin. Lovely to talk to you. Let's head home again now with the time at 14 minutes to 6. Stop monsters killing our babies, said one of the placards at Monday's protests in support of 3-year-old Moko, killed by 2 people caring for him. But our babies keep getting killed and less noticed by the media, and the protesters, they keep getting hurt day after day after day. Dr. Patrick Kelly is a paediatrician and Starship Hospital's child protection team leader. The buck stops with us all, he thinks, particularly with the people most likely to see children who are being abused, doctors, teachers, neighbours. And when we see, we have to say. The problem is, how do we say? And what do you say, and who do you say it to? Dr. Kelly says people who deal with children, including doctors, need more training about the right way to respond to evidence of abuse, because the very brutal reality is that the number of children being abused in New Zealand isn't decreasing.
And in fact, if you look at the trend over the last 20 years, they've been going steadily up at a rate that actually exceeds the rate of population increase. So I think it's a genuine increase, not just a change in recognition.
Which means that all the strategies to address these issues aren't as effective as we would hope?
No, I think that's correct.
So what needs to happen?
To be completely honest, I don't know that I know the answer, but I think that the scope and extent of the problem has to be taken very seriously, because I think the children that I see with abusive head trauma or other kinds of severe or fatal abuse are only the tip of the iceberg. I commend the desire of people in social policy and people in Wellington to make a difference, but I think the trend tends to be, to think that can only be solved by changes in social policy, and to some extent that's true. I mean, if we could address child poverty, if we could eliminate the sea of cheap alcohol in which the country floats, if we could address unemployment and overcrowding and all those other things, then yes, they would have an important effect. But I think also society as a whole has to step up and change our approach to the priority we give to children living within families. And I suppose my preoccupation, if you like, working within the health system is on energising the health system and the health workforce to understand what an important role they could have, rather than thinking that this is a problem that we need to refer to a social worker to solve.
Can you clarify what that important role is?
Well, if you as a health professional have a real concern about the welfare of a child, you owe it both to the child and to their family to be honest with them. It's not about being punitive. It's about saying, if we don't change something here, I'm seriously concerned that something bad is going to happen to your child. And the fact of the matter is that many, in fact most, families in which a child is abused or neglected contains adults who love and care for that child. A kind of a simplistic idea that the only people who abuse children hate children simply isn't true. So I think we can actually ally with families and work alongside them, potentially in a far more powerful way as health professionals than outsiders such as child youth and family social workers or police officers may be able to do. But if we're going to do that, we have to be better skilled at raising these kind of issues and knowing what to do if we get a positive response.
So when did you last see a case of abuse or neglect, or one of your staff members?
Today.
And without going into details, what sort of details that would identify the child, what sort of injuries did he or she have?
Well, head injuries, I think, yes, I mean, today, but we've within the week have seen children who've been raped, adolescents who've been raped, children who've been physically assaulted in various ways, children who've been neglected. The whole range of abuse and neglect in children from 0 to 19. And for many of those children, it carries on for far too long. So we do need more than just policy from above. We actually, I think, need change in the attitude and behaviour of a lot of people at a lot of different levels of society, from within families to within professions such as the health profession or the teaching profession, through to what we do about what we hear or see next door as in our neighbours' houses, through to the issues of social policy.
Dr. Patrick Kelly, paediatrician at Starship Hospital. 9 minutes to 6. A leaked report has backed the idea of shifting Auckland Port from its downtown site. The Port Future study obtained by RNZ News has picked Manukau Harbour or Kawakawa Bay on the Firth of Thames as the best alternative places for a new superport. In the meantime, though, the port needs to expand, and this is likely to come in the form of an extended Bledisloe Wharf. Eric Frickberg reports.
The special working group set up after last year's aborted wharf expansion in Auckland formally reports its findings on Friday. But RNZ News has learnt that the group thinks the existing port won't cope with expanded freight volumes in future, and expansion will be difficult because of community opposition. As a result, it'll probably have to move out of the city centre at some stage. A mayoral contender, the Labour MP Phil Goff, says more study is needed, and that could take decades. But eventually the port might be gone from central Auckland, a good thing, he thinks.
I'd like to see Aucklanders get access to the waterfront back, and I'd like to see that waterfront transformed into a great public space area, great residential housing and high-value added commercial activities.
A rival mayoral candidate, Victoria Crone, agrees this could be a great opportunity for Aucklanders.
Long term, the port needs to be moved, and what that allows us is to have a great think about what do we want from our waterfront. And when you think about Wynyard Quarter all the way around to Judges Bay, I mean, that will be an incredible statement of Auckland on the world stage.
If the Auckland port is moved, the most favoured option is Manukau Harbour, preferably at Puhunui near Auckland Airport. The working group believes this is practical despite a notorious sandbar at the harbour mouth, which caused many tragedies in the past, including New Zealand's worst ever shipwreck, the Orpheus. But it says dredging is feasible. A second option is one of two sites in the Firth of Thames. The report doesn't say that either of these would be easy, and the Minister of Transport, Simon Bridges, agrees.
The idea of moving the port to an entirely new place, look, is something Auckland's welcome to look at, but I don't think it's realistic. I think in terms of the consenting issues, the iwi issues, let alone before you get to the, I think, several $1 billion of costs, mean that it is not a particularly realistic option.
In its report, the working group put the cost of a new port at $4 to $5.5 billion, but it could be higher depending on how much connecting infrastructure is needed. Whichever way Auckland goes, the decision is an important one, according to Kirk Hope of Business New Zealand.
ports are essential for a trading nation like New Zealand because they support growth and they create jobs. I think it's great that Auckland's being proactive and pushing forward with future planning for their ports. The phased solution proposed recognises immediate requirements as well as future requirements.
One of those immediate developments would be a 25-metre extension of Bledisloe Wharf to an additional large ship berth. But the enlarged wharf would still be much smaller than a controversial proposal last year that prompted protests and was ultimately blocked by a court ruling. The report will be considered by the port's owner, Auckland Council, at a meeting next week. For Checkpoint, Eric Frickberg.
5 to 6. The Labour Party has accused the government of being too slow to act over the risks around the standard of steel being used on big projects. In the latest development, questions have been raised about steel strand used to strengthen bridges on the Waterview connection in Auckland. But the Transport Minister, Simon Bridges, says he's not worried. Phil Pennington reports.
600 or so tonnes of critical steel strand to strengthen bridges on the Waterview Highway was specified to meet only one part of the New Zealand standard and not the other part. This follows on from weak Chinese steel forcing a redesign of two Waikato expressway bridges. The Transport Agency says the Waterview steel imported from China has been tested by a top lab and meets the requirements of the standard. Simon Bridges says he has sought assurances from the Transport Agency and he guarantees people using the huge Waterview tunnel will be safe.
Well, look, certainly I've been guaranteed that that's the case, and so on that basis, yes, I can guarantee that.
But Labour's building spokesperson Phil Twyford says that's not good enough, either from the Minister or the agency.
Simon Bridges has been very slow to act on this, and quite frankly the public comments from NZTA on this issue of dodgy and uncertified steel have not, I don't think, given the public any confidence that they're on top of this problem. NZTA seems to have a see no evil, hear no evil policy.
The steel strand is pulled tight under incredible loads to give concrete all its tensile strength. RNZ News is still trying to establish why only part of the standard was specified when the strand was ordered by a Fletcher Construction subsidiary from a small factory in China called Ossen, which is not certified by the main reinforcing steel auditing body in Australasia. We're asking why that factory was chosen to supply such a vital product. The Transport Agency says it will be releasing more information later today. But Simon Bridges has heard enough.
I'm satisfied that the steel meets the standards, there's no discernible issues that I should be concerned about, and that the testing that needs to be done, indeed the independent testing that needs to be done, has been done.
Those tests were done in Taiwan on samples taken by the New Zealand arm of multinational laboratory SGS. This country doesn't have the equipment for it. It's not clear if SGS in Taiwan is accredited to test the steel strand to local standards. Phil Twyford isn't satisfied.
Look, it's very disturbing. There seems to be an endless stream of cases of dodgy steel being used in construction projects. And Labor's been consistently calling for the government to do an urgent stock take of construction projects. It's just not good enough.
RNZ News is now looking into another major project, not a roading project, where it has been confirmed that the wrong steel was imported, but it was discovered and replaced. For Checkpoint, Phil Pennington.
The Transport Agency has just put out a statement saying RNZ News is wrong to report the steel strand does not meet the New Zealand standard just because the second part isn't specified. Its Auckland and Northland Highway Manager, Brett Glidden, says that second part is about long-term testing and doesn't have to be specified to prove the steel is good enough. However, part 2 itself says its objective is to set out how much testing must be done to ensure compliance with the first part. But Brett Glidden says an American testing standard was used on the strand and the highways builders are satisfied it matches the local strand. Coming up to 2 minutes, just a repository for weird stuff sometimes. Here's an example. A Michigan prosecutor is considering whether the words of a pet parrot could be used as evidence in a murder trial. I kid you not. But a 19-year-old parrot has been repeating the phrase, "Don't something shoot," ever since his owner was shot multiple times in May of last year. Yiming Wu with this bizarre story.
Bud is a grey African parrot who could be providing evidence in a Michigan murder trial. His owner, Glenna Durham, is accused of murdering her husband, Martin, in front of the couple's pet in 2015. Durham's ex-wife, who now owns Bud, says he's been repeating Martin Durham's last words, which includes the phrase, "Don't shoot."
I know he's seen something pretty horrible. I know it's stuck there a little bit, you know. I know the way his cage was positioned, he had the front row view.
Prosecutors of the case say they're still considering whether to submit buzzwords as evidence.
It's something that we're going to be looking at, determining if it's reliable to use, but ultimately what we're going to look at is this a piece of information that we really need to prosecute the case?
Animal experts say parrots are highly intelligent creatures and that it's possible Bud remembers the alleged murder.
What a bizarre story. Lots of feedback tonight from the traffic in Wellington. It took me 2 hours to travel between Pukerua Bay and Paikakariki. That's insane. What would that normally take? 15, 20 minutes?
Yeah, not even that.
I did a U-turn and drove back through Upper Hutt via Akatarawa Valley. Nice trip home to north of Waikanai. Be good to get better information from the NZTA. I'd forgotten about that route. It's a windy old road, but obviously it worked. More feedback after the news at 6. Thank you all. Kia ora everyone, you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. On behalf of our team, thank you for being with us. In the next 30 minutes, Islamic State militants are blamed for the attack at Turkey's biggest airport, what the country's top cop thinks about the spike in crime, and New Zealand's 2016 Olympic uniforms are about to be unveiled, and we are there, and we have a special guest joining us from the unveiling. All of that and more in the next 29.5 minutes. But first, before all of that, RNZ News with Katrina Batten.
Ngā mihi nui, good evening. A mother and her young daughter had to be rescued by police and a passerby from their partially submerged car as a record deluge of rain swept through Auckland this afternoon. The fire service says the woman and her school-aged daughter were stuck in Subway Road in Pukekohe. The emergency services dealt with scores of call-outs, including to more than 80 flooded homes following the downpour between 1 and 2 o'clock. Auckland Transport says all major roads are now open, but commuters should expect delays, especially on State Highway 16 westbound. The National Institute of Water and Atmospheric Research says 25.4 millimetres of rain fell in 1 hour. This is the most rain in 1 hour for June since records began. Civil Defence says the problems caused by heavy rain in Auckland are easing. A spokesperson, Aaron Davis, says there's been a very high number of calls and he's asking people to be patient while the council and emergency services deal with the problems.
There's significant call volumes that have been going through, but we are prioritising them and getting them through, and then we're following up those areas to identify why there's potential flooding there and what we can do to remediate that.
Aaron Davis from Civil Defence in Auckland. As the rain moves east, the east coast of the North Island could be in for flooding and slips. State Highway 1 north of Wellington has reopened, but motorists are told to expect significant delays for the next couple of hours. The road between Mackay's Crossing and Paikakariki was down to 1 lane following a gas leak earlier today. The chair of the Transport Agency's Regional Transport Response Team, Richard Hocken, says traffic remained backed up to the Parimata Bridge nearly 20 kilometres south.
Because of the significant backlog, we're still advising that people from Wellington should delay their travel time, suggest that they even have tea in town before heading north at 8 p.m. or thereabouts so that they don't get caught up behind a queue.
Richard Hocken. The lawyer for serial rapist Malcolm Rewa says it's outrageous the police commissioner has claimed his client is guilty of murder. Rewa was found guilty of raping Susan Burdett, but 2 High Court juries could not decide if he murdered her, and the Solicitor General stayed proceedings in 1998. Today, the Police Commissioner Mike Bush said he recognises Taina Pora is innocent of the rape and murder. He says he believes Rewa killed Susan Burdett. Rewa's lawyer, Nigel Cook, says there's no basis for that statement. He says the Commissioner should shut up and accept that the case against Rewa has been stayed. Turkish officials say that foreigners are likely to be among the 36 people killed by terrorists in the arrivals area of the country's main international airport. 3 gunmen opened fire before exploding suicide bombs at Istanbul's Ataturk Airport, Europe's 3rd biggest. The ABC's Frank Bonacorso reports.
Witnesses have described the scene at Ataturk Airport as carnage. Scores were also wounded when 3 gunmen opened fire before blowing themselves up. One man in the terminal says people around him were caught up in the gunfire and subsequent blast.
Someone next to us got shot. Then we saw the bomb explode.
everybody around it died in that blast.
Reports suggest it was a coordinated assault. The government believes Islamic State militants are responsible. The Turkish Prime Minister has visited the blast site. 125 people have now died in terrorist attacks this year in Istanbul and the Turkish capital Ankara.
Frank Bonacorso reporting. The Transport Minister says the steel in the Waterview Highway and tunnel in Auckland is up to standard and safe. Only half of the required New Zealand standard was specified when hundreds of tonnes of multi-strand wire was ordered from a factory in China that's not audited by Australasian certifiers. The Minister, Simon Bridges, says he has sought assurances from the Transport Agency that the steel is okay.
I'm satisfied that the steel meets the standards, there's no discernible issues that I should be concerned about, and that the testing that needs to be done, indeed the independent testing that needs to be done, has been done.
Simon Bridges, the Transport Agency, says the strand passed tests by a top lad, SGC, and that none of it has failed at Waterview. The government is looking for new contractors to take on the long-delayed Christchurch Convention Centre. The building was supposed to be a centrepiece in Christchurch's earthquake rebuild, with initial indications that work would start in 2014, aimed at a completion date of early 2017. The Minister supporting Greater Christchurch Regeneration, Jerry Brownlee, says the government has completed early design and master planning stages with Plenary Conventions New Zealand, but other contractors will now be sought. He says there was never a contract with Plenary for the overall construction.
There was a contract for the master planning and the development of the whole precinct concept. We pick up all of that and we're moving ahead now with the construction of the convention centre.
Mr Brownlee says the government is on course to open the convention centre in late 2019. To sport, and there's no rest for All Blacks captain Kieran Reid after the 3-test series against Wales. He's named to lead the competition leaders, the Crusaders, in their match against the Chiefs in Suva on Friday night. His side features 7 returning All Blacks, with the only omissions being midfielder Ryan Crotty and lock Luke Romano, who are out through injury. Meanwhile, All Blacks first 5, Aaron Cruden will make his Super Rugby comeback for the Chiefs from the bench after suffering a neck injury in the second test against Wales. Chiefs coach Dave Rennie is confident Cruden's fit to return and says he'll get plenty of game time.
Yeah, he needs to get through a bit of contact work, but he's fine. He'll still play a fair bit of game time. We've gone with Stephen Donald based on the fact that he's been with us the last month. The little shifts we've made in our game, he's really clear on. He's a big part of our attack.
Chiefs coach Dave Rennie. The New Zealand golfer Steve Alker has qualified for the 3rd major of the year, the British Open at Royal Troon in Scotland. Compatriot Danny Lee is also in the open field. Alker finished tied for 19th at the event 4 years ago. That's the news.
Firing salvos.
I said I wanted to lead a campaign to get Britain to leave the European Union. You all laughed at me. You're not laughing now, are you?
Fear of doomsday.
A lot of people in Ireland still hope that the doomsday scenario won't actually come to pass, notwithstanding the fact that the British voters have spoken.
Turkey under attack.
Police fired shots at suspects at the entrance to the International Departures Hall, and the 2 suspects blew themselves up.
Global ructions. Guy and Espiner and Susie Ferguson Morning Report, weekdays from 6.
Then on 9 to noon, from farm to fork, how do food producers, traders and regulators maintain food safety, quality and authenticity? And after 10, Richard Watson on how we'll live, love and think in the future, and putting humanity before technology. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Met Service weather through to midnight tomorrow for all of the North Island. Rain or showers for most places with some heavy falls, especially in Bay of Plenty and Hawke's Bay, south of Napier. Isolated thunderstorms with localised downpours are possible in Auckland, Coromandel Peninsula and Bay of Plenty until this evening. A cold southerly change may bring snow to the Desert Road later tomorrow. Marlborough, occasional rain. Nelson and Buller, cloudy periods. A few showers possible in Nelson until early morning. All fine for Westland, Fiordland, showers clearing overnight and becoming fine. Southland, Otago and Canterbury, scattered showers developing about Southland and Otago this evening, spreading to Canterbury tomorrow but clearing in Southland and Otago. The Chatham Islands, occasional drizzle, turning to heavy rain later tomorrow with southeast gales and possible thunderstorms. It's almost 6:09.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina. Turkey's government has blamed Islamic State for a terrorist attack at the main international airport in Istanbul. At least 36 people were killed and more than 100 wounded when 3 suicide bombers blew themselves up at Ataturk Airport. The authorities have confirmed one blast happened in a car park while the other 2 attackers detonate their explosives at the arrivals hall inside the terminal. A Turkish official says the vast majority of those killed were Turkish nationals, but foreigners are also among the dead. The ABC's Brendan Trembath has just filed this report.
We heard an explosion and we saw people running to the opposite side.
The first frantic moments after suicide bombers attacked Ataturk Airport in Istanbul.
It was confusion, total confusion.
There was a big explosion. That's it, a huge explosion. It was terrible inside. I saw it.
Anxious and frightened travellers hid where they could, including duty-free shops and a prayer room. Lawrence Cameron, who arrived at Ataturk Airport as the attack occurred, spoke to CNN.
I didn't actually hear the explosion. I just stepped off the plane, and as I walked round the corner to where the visas are issued, this just massive crowd of screaming people. Just pure panic, people falling over themselves. Some poor chap in a wheelchair had just been sort of left. And everyone just sort of rushed to the back of the building, and then people ran the other way, and no one really seemed to know what was going on. But I can actually see the blast scene now. They've actually let us out of the passport control area.
Time magazine's Middle East Bureau Chief Jared Masson spoke to the Al Jazeera network from just outside the airport.
It's an extremely chaotic scene where I am, which is at the entrance to the international terminal here at Ataturk Airport. There's ambulances coming and going. There's police who are trying to wrangle crowds of people. You can probably hear the sirens.
Hundreds of people were stuck inside for 2 or 3 hours as police searched the building.
A lot of really distraught, emotional people coming out of the airport terminal. A moment ago, I saw a woman in tears come out and embrace someone else, presumably a friend or family member. I saw another person with a bandage on his face.
Dozens of people are dead and many injured. Turkey's Prime Minister Binali Yildirim said 3 suicide bombers opened fire at passengers with automatic rifles before blowing themselves up.
This attack, targeting innocent people, is a cowardly, planned terrorist attack. Our country continues its fight against terrorists and terrorist organizations.
The Prime Minister did not identify the bombers or give their nationality, but he did point the finger at Islamist extremists.
There is an indication that the attack has been carried out by the Daesh organization, ISIL organization. However, our investigations continue.
The Prime Minister added that the attackers had arrived at the airport by taxi. He ruled out any security failings at Ataturk, which is one of Europe's busiest air hubs. Andrew Finkel, a journalist based in Istanbul, notes security there is usually tight.
There's guards with machine guns. They are obviously keeping an eye out for certain people.
People coming and going are screened early on.
In order to get into the airport itself, be it the arrivals or departures, you have to go through a security check. You have to have your bags checked, and you go through a metal detector.
The US Secretary of State, John Kerry, has condemned the airport attack in Istanbul.
We are still collecting information and trying to ascertain what happened and who did it. And I won't comment further on it except to say that this is daily fare. And that's why I say the first challenge we need to face is countering non-state violent actors.
That report just in from the ABC's Brendan Trembath. It's 6:13 on Checkpoint. The Police Commissioner has told MPs he's worried about a spike in crime. And the Commissioner, Mike Bush, isn't ruling out closing even more of the country's community police stations and kiosks following several recent attacks on police staff, saying he has to put the safety of his police staff first. Political reporter Benedict Collins has more.
Labour's police spokesperson Stuart Nash pointed out at today's Law and Order Select Committee that the latest police statistics show there's been a spike in crime, with the number of burglaries, assaults and robberies all on the rise. The Police Commissioner Mike Bush told MPs the jump in crime has to be kept in perspective.
Burglary rates are some of the lowest rates in over a decade. In recent times, there has been an increase. Now that concerns me.
The Police Minister Judith Collins tried to put a positive spin on the jump in crime when speaking to reporters later.
Well, there may have been a slight bump in crime, and I think the Commissioner said that was most likely so. But I think that what we're seeing is if police go after drug offenders, that's always going to be counting as offences.
Community police stations and kiosks all over the country have been closed in recent years, and a review being carried out by the police following attacks on civilian police staff could soon see more join them. Commissioner Bush says he can recall 2 recent attacks on unsworn staff at kiosks, and he says that's too many.
Still quite early days, so we haven't settled on an answer to that. I was lobbied recently by a number of volunteers that they're willing to put themselves there in that space because they love serving their communities. But again, I've got to step back and say, how do I make sure they're safe?
The Labour MP Phil Goff asked the Police Minister why the police are retreating from the public.
I'm trying to figure out why a police station is different from an electorate office or a shop.
This is a choice for the Commissioner of Police, and I support him in making decisions he has to make to keep his staff and his volunteers safe. Because if something happens to one of his people, it's not you, Mr Goff, that's going to answer for it, it's the Commissioner.
Stuart Nash believes the real reason community police stations and kiosks are being closed isn't for safety reasons, rather it's down to the government trying to pinch pennies.
That's my suspicion. I mean, you can always find reasons to do things. The Police Minister has used health and safety. I think that's being a little bit disingenuous. What I would love to see is these kiosks open.
The committee also heard that the Auckland Police Districts have gained just 5 constables in the last 4 years, while the city's population has swelled. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Benedict Collins.
Let's return to Brexit. We were in Brussels in the European Parliament after 5 o'clock. It's triggered political turmoil and angst throughout the EU and on the ground in Britain. A documented and widely reported rise in racist attacks. The Muslim Council of Britain put together a gallery of 100 hate incidents from social media accounts and called for the Home Secretary to step up security for migrants in the country. Meanwhile, anti-immigration leaflets citing Polish vermin have been posted on cars, and people going about their daily lives have been told to go home, wherever home is. But what if Britain is the only home you know? I spoke to Rishi Patel, who was attacked in the street in London on the afternoon of the referendum result, and asked him what happened.
Was walking with a friend down the Strand, which is kind of one of the main kind of busy streets in central London. Didn't really kind of think about anything. We were just chatting about what had happened and kind of what it meant and how we felt about it. And out of nowhere, a guy came up to me and he swore at me, and then he punched me in the face. I mean, I was really lucky. I think I was wearing these very big glasses, which now are in fashion, in vogue, as they say, and they basically took a lot of the blow. So I spared myself kind of a black eye or any kind of huge physical damage. But it was all very, very sudden. I didn't really know what was going on, and then he ran away, and lots of people came to my aid from the street, and yeah, it all happened in a blur. I don't even really know what he said, because after that kind of thing happens, you kind of black out, and you don't really know what's happened. It was all very, very sudden.
Rishi, you are clearly English, quintessentially English, beautifully English, but you are ethnically, forgive, this is a terrible question and I feel ashamed to ask it, but I suspect it's material. What ethnicity are you?
Yeah, so I think it's important. It's important to say. So I'm an Indian person. Indian origin person, I should say. My parents are Indian. They came to the UK in the 70s. And so ethnically I'm Indian, but it's strange, because obviously we're on the radio, so you can't see what I look like, but yeah, I don't think I sound particularly Indian. In fact, I probably sound more English than most English people.
You do, and
by
so
circumstance of where I was born and where I grew up. But I think it's quite peculiar. I think physically, I definitely stand out as someone who doesn't look white. But I never thought that that would ever be a thing in a multi-ethnic and multiracial society like in London, especially.
Rishi, does this change how you see your home now, Britain, England? Does it change how you see the place you live? Does it change your awareness of yourself when you're out in a crowd? Does it, at some fundamental level, change everything for you?
I think that was you've made an interesting point in that that was why this vote was particularly important for someone like me. I was very much kind of on the Remain side, for my own reasons and my own beliefs. But at the back of my mind, I was very aware of the climate that was being precipitated by the campaign and what it meant for people that were not visibly from an ethnically white background. I don't know if it means it's still too soon to tell. I think what it means for me and for my future. But I do think that it shows that we have a big concern amongst a large section of society for immigration or for whatever, and that is being exploited by a minority of people that feel legitimized by the vote. They feel that their will is now being answered. And that's what we're seeing in the UK with this, on social media. With these videos, with people being told to go home even though they've never lived anywhere else. It's a legitimization of this kind of xenophobia, which may well have been lurking in certain parts of society, but definitely was not mainstream, and not acceptable. I mean, to be honest, I don't also think it is acceptable. I think people are really shocked by what's going on, and that's been one thing that has really struck me since this happened, and since I kind of started speaking out a bit more and spoke to other people to whom this has happened, is that lots of people have come to me and said, look, we're really sorry that this has happened to you. And I'm not looking for pity or for any kind of anything like that. It's more just to kind of identify that this could happen to me, but I'm fine and I can deal with it, but I don't want it to happen to other people. So I think it's important to address.
Rishi Patel, who was just punched in the face as he walked through central London amongst the people who came to his aid afterwards, some Polish immigrants. 22 past 6. The country's environmental watchdog says New Zealand won't uphold the climate commitments it made in Paris unless the government starts taking climate change more seriously. The Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment, Jan Wright, has criticised the government's landmark State of the Environment report released last year, saying it gives no perspective on the seriousness of the problem. Here's our environment reporter, Kate Gudsall.
Jan Wright's commentary says climate change is without doubt the most serious environmental issue facing the country.
Now, at the moment, I cannot possibly see how New Zealand can reach the commitment it's made at Paris by 2030. And, of course, we need to be looking ahead to 2070 and beyond, in a world really without greenhouse gases. So it is of great importance.
And she wants the government to be doing a lot more about it.
We have the emissions trading scheme and people sort of understand that we need to price carbon, so that sort of helps, but it has yet to be effective. We need other things as well. And one of the reasons I'm suggesting stabilising all these hills with trees, because those trees will store carbon. So there's a lot more to do.
Do you think the government takes climate change seriously enough?
I would like to take it far more seriously.
Dr. Wright says New Zealand has a legacy of erosion after a century of clearing bush on unstable hill country, resulting in an enormous amount of sediment ending up in waterways, which continues today. She says climate change is projected to bring more intense and frequent heavy downpours, which will exacerbate the problem. Labour's environment spokesperson David Parker says the government's making moves that don't make sense economically.
We know that one of the cheapest things that you can do to reduce carbon emissions is to afforest our erosion-prone lands, and yet the government has undermined the economic signals that encourage more planting and encourage deforestation.
Dr. Wright says reducing transport emissions to create low-carbon cities also needs particular attention. But Greenpeace's Executive Director Russell Norman says a commentary is a please explain to the government. He says government policies are designed to make emissions increase.
When it comes to transport, the government has been subsidising increase in fuel consumption by subsidising giant motorways. They're not really spending the money as they should be in terms of balancing public transport, walking, cycling and all the rest of it. But I mean, when you look at agriculture as well, half of our emissions the government is subsidising to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars.
But the Climate Change Minister, Paula Bennett, is adamant the government's doing enough to address the problems.
There is a lot of change going on, whether it's through transport to electric vehicles, to some of the adaptation work that's going on. Our renewable energies is pretty startling. When you look at some of the ag research that's going on in the agricultural sector, which is actually one of the most sustainable in the world actually for how we are farming and actually producing that kind of food that the world and most certainly New Zealanders need.
The next report from Dr. Wright will be on agricultural greenhouse gases. And she says tackling climate change will involve bold leadership from the government. For Checkpoint, Kate Gudsall.
Thank you, Kate. We appreciate it. We're just going to go to Eliza McCartney, who is a pole vaulter in the New Zealand Olympic team. And Eliza knows what the new Olympic uniform looks like. It's being revealed tonight at 7:10. We're just waiting to establish contact with Eliza, who's been on Checkpoint before and is a fantastic young person, still only 19 years of age. In fact, will compete at the Olympics, age still only 19. Feedback, lots of people talking about traffic out of Wellington and basically how crap it is tonight. But Vanessa said, I love New Zealand. Richard giving advice to get some tea in town and avoid the traffic was delightfully comforting. Thank you, Vanessa. We've also had a lot of feedback from expat Brits who are now, of course, New Zealanders living in New Zealand, talking about their take on Brexit. And overwhelmingly, people have been disappointed about Brexit. But there has been the odd bit of feedback saying, hey, the tyranny of Europe, of Brussels, was starting to alter the fabric of the country. Thank you for all of your feedback. We really appreciate it. We do hope now that we've got Eliza there. Have we got Eliza? But, okay, well, I'm going to have to keep padding. I'm going to tell you a story about Eliza because the last time she was on Checkpoint, she'd just done a remarkable thing. She'd come from nowhere, really, as a pole vaulter. And she broke her own national record by a margin, eclipsed a new Oceania mark, really out of the blue in Dunedin. She was so euphoric. She was picked for the Olympics. She went off and came 5th in the end of the world indoors. Pole vaulting is not a sport that we have ever done tremendously well at before. And Eliza, it's lovely to have you back on Checkpoint. I really enjoyed our last chat. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you going?
Yeah, good. How's the training going?
Really good, yeah. I'm leaving really soon, so we're just, I guess, nailing the finer details now.
Wow, so when you say you're leaving, where are you going to before Rio?
Yes, I'm off. I'm going to spend my time in Germany, and I'll be over there for about 5 weeks, and then we go straight from there to Rio, so yeah, I'm gone.
And who will you train with in Germany?
Myself, mostly.
Oh, yeah, so the Germans don't say, come and join us, Eliza. I guess that's not how it works. You're just working on your own.
To an extent, I guess the New Zealand team is going over, so the athletics team. So I'll be there with the rest of the athletes, and my coach is there, which is awesome. So we'll be training, I guess, by ourselves over there, but it'd be great if there's other people who want to join in. Yeah,
we need to talk about the uniform, although you can't tell us anything about it. But one last question, how are you vaulting at the moment? Are you pleased with how it's going?
I'm pleased with the last few months. We've really been working hard on it, and especially the technical side of things. I mean, you're always wanting to get stronger and faster, but we've been focusing on the technique because that's something I've still got a lot to learn on. And so I've got another 5 weeks in Germany where hopefully we can really get it going. So, yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. This is a fairy tale, isn't it? I mean, I'm sure people in pole vaulting were aware of you, but prior to March, when you just shattered all the records there were to shatter in New Zealand in terms of pole vaulting, you were a little bit below the radar. Now you're off to Rio. It's pretty magic, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, this year I can't even tell you. It's been crazy. Like you said, last year wasn't so much the same, and it suddenly just blew up, and all of a sudden everybody wanted to know. But it's great, and I've had a lot of support over the last few months and the last years as well, so I've been very lucky.
Yeah, well, you make your own luck, Eliza. You work really hard. Let's talk about the uniform. You can't actually describe it, can you? Because it's not being revealed till 7. Have they recruited you as a uniform model this evening?
Yes, they have, which I'm delighted to do, actually. It's good fun.
and what's it like? Do you like it?
I do. It's cool. I mean, I probably shouldn't say too much. I don't even know what I'm allowed to say.
Just say a little bit. Say a little bit, Eliza.
Well, it's nice. I really like it, and I think it really works well with the whole Rio theme, of course. So yeah.
Right, the whole Rio theme. Okay.
I'll stop. I don't even know what I'm
Is it the same colour as the uniform of our national rugby team, for example, Eliza? Can you?
Yes, of course, that's involved.
And would you be able to pole vault in it?
I don't know about that actually. My uniform has to be a little bit different, I guess, because of I don't want to get anything caught on anything running and jumping. As
you go over. So that suggests it's flares, Eliza. La 70s flares.
I guess you'll find out.
Eliza, it's lovely to talk to you, and we look forward to seeing the uniform. And if we don't talk to you beforehand, have a wonderfully great time in Rio. Enjoy every moment of it, and good luck.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's great talking to you.
Eliza McCartney, who is off to vault for New Zealand at Rio, ending checkpoint for tonight. See you tomorrow at 5.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Civil Defence says the problems caused by heavy rain in Auckland are easing after the city's biggest downpour in 40 years flooded homes and set cars afloat. The government is looking for new contractors to take on the long-delayed Christchurch Convention Centre. Malcolm Rewa's lawyer says it's outrageous the police commissioner has said he believes his client is guilty of killing Susan Burdett. And Turkish officials say foreigners are likely to be among the 36 people killed by suicide bombers in Istanbul's international airport. Our next news and weather is at 7. This is RNZ National. I'm Katrina Batten. In Trending Now, our feature at this time highlighting the stories you've been sharing via digital and social media. Tonight we hear from 9 to noon's regular Monday chat about politics from the left and the right. Here's Matthew Hooton and Stephen Mills dissecting the Brexit vote.
The very best result